Hi, Alan. Nice to have you on this conversation. Just for everyone who's watching, it would be great if you could just give us a little bit of an intro about yourself and who you are and what you've been up to.
Sure. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to talk with you guys today. So my name is Allan Cockriel. I'm currently the Group CIO for Petrofac, and soon will be transitioning to a CIO role for Shell. So I've been in the IT industry for just under 20 years, a lot of international roles and roles that have kind of taken me to some interesting places, from digital transformation, M&A work, and a lot of exciting projects.
It's been an interesting time. So you've been working with Petrofac. You've finished your tenure there and are looking to transition over to a new opportunity in the middle of a international health crisis.
That's right.
I mean, how's that been for you? That must have been quite something.
Yeah, look, I couldn't plan it any better. I think this lockdown has come at a very interesting time. For me personally, I'm transitioning between two roles. So a lot of the onboarding and getting up to speed with the new role has been virtual. So if you think about the power of first impressions, I haven't had the luxury to shake people's hands, if that's even allowed these days, and to get to know people in person. So Zoom, Skype, all of these products have been my new best friend as I've been establishing those connections. Yeah. And hopefully in the near future we'll be able to get out and get to interact with each other again.
Yeah. And I mean, mentioning digital transformation, it's an area that you're a specialist in, and how for you is COVID-19 affecting, how a CIO would approach digital transformation?
Yeah, look, obviously the COVID-19 situation has had, pretty dramatic impacts, negative impacts on a lot of people. So withstanding that, from a digital perspective, this has actually been a huge blessing in terms of rapidly driving new ways of working, adoption of contemporary technology, and really, pivoting businesses from being maybe more traditional office-based to be fully comfortable and effective operating at the edge and operating remotely and operating with these types of collaboration tools. So yeah, at least in the Petrofac context, it's been very interesting to see a company pivot to 100% work from home, when historically it had been pretty much an office-based culture.
Yeah. And you've had some time now to reflect since the pandemic hit us. And have you had any sort of key reflections as a CIO recently in light of what's happened, and how you took your team into that pandemic and dealing with the challenges? Have you had any reflections?
Yeah, look, I think these type of, I'd say, leapfrog or seismic shifts in behavior usually come off the back of major external factors. So in traditional sense, it's usually a customer requirement, or it's a regulatory change, or some sort of macroeconomic shift. But in this case, it was a highly contagious pandemic. And the necessity bears out a lot of these type of transitions. And I think at least what I've seen is that in these types of situations where there is no other option, or there is no way to revert to the way things historically have been done, where people are forced in certain cases to use the new tools and use the new technology. And I think at least what I've seen is that this old perception that remote workforce can't be effective, or managerial practices won't necessarily be effective, or the technology won't work, I think that's all been thrown out of the window, because in most cases, teams have been highly effective in this new paradigm.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you mentioned about the new approach to remote working and mobility, and it feels a little bit like the world might not be the same. We've used to new patterns of working. Whereas previously we've been very, very much used to co-working in a single location. Now we've got used to this idea of remote working. So, in light of that, what role do you think digital strategy will play over the next decade in light of changes in work practice? Is that going to increase the emphasis on how CIOs think about digital strategy?
Yeah, I think this situation has proved out that these new contemporary tools are very effective, and I think is really going to call into questions historical ways of working. So I really, fundamentally, I kind of challenge the concept of an office in its historical sense. Do we need to have several thousands or hundreds of thousands of people drive to come to one place to work for a set amount of time and then drive or fly or walk home? I think we now see that people can be fully effective with their PC or their mobile device. And I think we'll probably see a pivot to a different type of situation where maybe we have more collaboration spaces. We have teams that are doing remote collaboration, maybe not necessarily fully relying on a traditional office environment.
Yes.
And I think more broadly for digital technology, I think these tools have proved their worth. And I think it's going to be important for the technical function and the digital functions to be a key enabler as we start to explore more and more different capabilities going forward.
And do you think it's been a wake-up call for many businesses who have perhaps been a bit slow on the uptake when it comes to digital strategy and digital transformation?
I think it did, because it highlighted a major weakness in those business continuity plans, for businesses that underinvested in technology, underinvested in collaboration tools, or at least a secure way of managing a distributed workforce. I think those businesses were genuinely playing a pretty aggressive catch up. And for businesses that made that investment, like Petrofac, the pivot to a remote working situation was a bit easier. And instead of facing fundamental technical debt and large upgrade requirements, we were focusing on end user effectiveness and training and communication. So I think that type of investment, as long as it's part of the business's pro forma each year, is first off well worth it. But then secondly, will pay dividends in these types of situations.
And a business's investment in its software real estate as well, keeping that modern, up to date. I assume those businesses that have done that will have benefited from that in this crisis. And what's your approach to the software real estate and how you modernize that over time?
Yeah, look, we've made a heavy investment in pushing the cloud agenda. And, there's a lot of benefits to cloud around support and upgrades and, the quality of the software. But, this situation proved out the fact that if you're able to connect to enterprise grade tools anywhere in the world from effectively any device, that's a very powerful tool, both in a crisis, but then also in, this potential new way of working that I think collectively we'll be facing into. So that investment will be very important. We've always attempted to do a cloud first strategy. And I think this situation only reinforces that decision and strategy.
And you can see by I think there's been quite a few increases in the amount of the use of cloud, especially during this pandemic. So it seems to be that those who have made themselves cloud ready have really benefited. There is a conversation we often have about software, and especially in terms of how an enterprise how it works out its strategy in relation to software. Businesses generally tend to go through cycles of popularity between bespoke builds and buying off the shelf. And that conversation never seems to stop, and the waves seem to go up and down between the two. And what factors do you consider when considering whether to buy or build?
Yeah, look, at a macro level, I think the expectation is growing for people in the corporate environment to expect consumer grade experiences. So individuals are so used to seeing a Facebook, a LinkedIn, these type of really fantastic and intuitive UIs. I think the corporate environment has been lagging in that regard. So I think first and foremost, the expectation is that those tools should be as easy to use and provide that integrated experience that they receive in their kind of personal lives. So I think that first and foremost is one of the main drivers. And in terms of build versus buy, I think before you get to that decision, a lot of the conversation needs to be about driving simple process, because it's easy to overcomplicate something you build from scratch or hyper configure something you buy off the shelf. I think the first conversation needs to be about, are we driving, if you look at it from the customer journey perspective, are we driving the simplest way to deliver the outcome for the customer? And I think that conversation will bear out, is there something in the market that you can take off the shelf and configure, adopting some sort of market standard? Or do you have a unique differentiating process that you have to go out and build? And I think that key reliance and focus on driving simple process will easily drive that situation.
Yeah, understood. I mean, you mentioned about the whole user interface, user experience side of things. In the past, it's been fairly standard for software developed for back office to be fairly terrible. But your point about those consumer apps driving people's expectations is absolutely right. And have you seen an increase in investment in UI UX more broadly in enterprise over the last year or so?
I'd say over the last 5 years, I think a good intuitive UX is now table stakes for an application to be effective, because tool can be technically very strong, but if it's not easy to use, it doesn't provide an intuitive experience. The adoption of that technology will be increasingly difficult, just because of the expectation that people have when they walk in the door, and they expect to see tools that work properly.
Yeah. One of the things I'm always really interested in chatting with CIOs is their view on change. Change is a massive deal in organizations, and obviously the bigger the organization, the harder it is to see change or to handle it well. In IT, there's traditionally been your forerunners in terms of change with modernization of how we work through the implementation of technology. What's your approach to change within an organization that you work? And as a CIO, how do you lead that change?
Yeah, well, I think it comes down to culture fundamentally. So the way I hire leaders and the way I set the culture the tone of the organization is really rewarding and growing techno-functional leaders. And these are people that are able to come into a situation with good business acumen, process discipline, and a general curiosity about technology, because the portfolio of tools in the market, I'd argue, turns about every 2 years. So an individual who came in and say, well, I might be a C programmer, I might know Fortran or one of these historical tools that you could probably build a career off of. I don't see that sense of permanency when it comes to the technology that we're dealing with. So instead of maybe going for a specific domain expert, I would hire someone who's got a great technical foundation and will be continually learning, because I think that individual will be more successful as the waves of technology move forward. And I think also another trend that I'm seeing is a fundamental departure from buying technology and moving to leasing or renting. Because again, the big CapEx investment to buy something, to hold on to it, you have to be very comfortable that technology or that widget will remain required and relevant in that 5 to 7 year investment window. Where my personal opinion is that moving to a rental model or a subscription model gives a tremendous amount of flexibility to be able to use that tool to its logical extent, and then not have a huge amount of technical debt when the seas change.
We've seen that as well with the whole hardware infrastructure and the move from on-premise to the cloud. And it's an interesting area because the reliance on hardware experts has reduced, and now the reliance has increased on software and the growth of DevOps as well as a methodology for getting production ready. How have you seen the adoption of cloud? Traditionally, it was very, very challenging because there was concerns around the security. Now they seem to have been allayed, but still, it's a process of change, isn't it? It's a process of educating people. How's that been for you?
Look, I think you have to get people over the apprehension of putting your information on someone else's kit. I think that's effectively what cloud is. You're just buying someone else's or space in someone else's servers. I think the nice thing is that you have a relatively large use case where companies across the spectrum have been adopting it. And then within the cloud offering, you have, public options, hybrid options, and a private option. So I think in that case, technology-wise, there's a really great service offering available. I think financially, it makes sense in most contexts. And then the other piece of it is, like with everything new, there's always going to be a fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And I think as more and more folks adopt it, then that fear will generally subside. And then the other point when I'm having kind of conversations about cloud is that if you look at these environments, they're built from scratch, with the best technology and the best way to segment and secure information. Where if you go into a traditional data center, and we're no different. You have technical debt, you have design considerations that were taken at a different time that may not present the most modern cyber structure. And I think moving to a cloud environment, you're benefiting from best of breed, built from scratch.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's a fascinating world, and we're going to see most likely some very interesting changes ahead of us as a result of the recent pandemic. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I just wanted to ask you a couple of slightly sort of more fun questions. What are your has there been an executive or thought leader that has influenced you, and is there any particular books you've read that you would recommend that's been a particular influence in your thinking as a CIO?
From a leadership perspective, I generally take a little bit of wisdom from a lot of different leaders. So I think, from my experience at GE, I've been exposed to, really fantastic leaders. So I wouldn't have one that I could hold up and say, that's the guru, but I can definitely say I take a little bit of wisdom from everyone I interact with. And in terms of books, I have a young family, so most of my books now are children's books. But I can tell you that rereading, or at least exposing my children to Aesop's fables, has been a fantastic kind of tour through my management practice, because for how simple those stories are, the lessons in life and management are quite profound. So it's been an interesting trip down memory lane and seeing how those stories have influenced me.
Brilliant. Well, Allan, it's been a pleasure to speak to you, and thanks for the time. And I just wish you all the best in your new opportunity. And
appreciate that.
Chat.
All right. Have a great day. Thanks for the time.
Thank you.